Hey everyone, Walter Crosby with Helix Sales Development, your host of Sales and Cigars. Today we have an interesting episode with Mason Harris, and AKA the Chutzpah Guy. So he and I had a fun conversation. It's a little longer than my normal conversations, so you might have to spread this out over a couple of workouts, but really interesting, worth the time, great stories, and talking about how Chutzpah really helps an entrepreneur and how they naturally have this. But there's another element here where we talk about how you can use this and kind of give this idea of Chutzpah to your team to help them realize your vision, to help you get what you're looking for out of your business. Because everybody's in sales, but everybody needs a little chutzpah from time to time. So go grab a cocktail, grab a cigar, and strap in for another fun episode of Sales and Cigars. Mason, welcome to Sales and Cigars. I appreciate you taking some time to jump on have a conversation today.
Well, Walter, thank you for the invite. I'm looking forward to having a great conversation with you to the benefit of our audience.
That's the goal, and to have a little fun while we're doing it. And based on our conversation in the green room, if you will, I think it's going to be an easy objective to hit.
Okay.
With some commonalities here. Let's kind of jump into your journey. Something tells me that growing up in New York, growing up Queens, and navigating life through that lens there's some interesting stories there. Talk a little bit about how we don't need to go to kindergarten, but pick up someplace and tell us how you got to where we are today.
Oh, I was going to go all the way back to conception, but it looks like we got to start years earlier. So
I had a guy go to first grade, and it was because he failed first grade.
Oh.
It was a seminal moment in his life that it was okay to fail. That was a great takeaway, right? Like,
yeah.
You learn at a 5 or 6 year old that it's okay to fail and your life still goes on. So
well, I managed to get through first grade unscathed. So I was fortunate. It took many, many years before I started being left back. But let's see, my background. My parents are immigrants to this country. So. Okay. In a way, I was both fortunate and unfortunate. Fortunate because I grew up with an appreciation for the opportunities here. Because of what they left behind, what they, in essence, fled, they had an appreciation for our country, for America, in ways that other people do not. They appreciated that they can fail. People can dislike them, and they can find a way around them. The unfortunate piece was kids are always, oh, my parents are different. My family is different. I just want to fit in. My parents had an accent. That was like, oh my God, this is not where I want to go. I wish they wouldn't speak so much when my friends came home. But it worked out. So everything has a balance to it. And I have this appreciation for, basically thinking about our audience. Entrepreneurship, the ease of which we can make the decision to move forward, doesn't mean it's easy being an entrepreneur. There are local rules, regulations, ordinances, financing, all sorts of things we have to learn. Hiring, recruiting, staying within compliance, and regulatory issues now, actually for years. It's not necessarily easy, but they are choices for us to make. They're options. We're not limited the way we might be elsewhere, or limited as much.
So my wife's family immigrated to this country. They had accents. They didn't learn the language because their parents always wanted to practice English with the kids. I think one of the things that I've noticed with families that have immigrated and their first generation children, there is absolutely no sense of entitlement from that next generation. Like, there's a lot of entitlement in the world today, and that's one of the cool things, the reasons why I love entrepreneurs, is that there isn't this, I want to do this, I have to do this, it's my passion. But there's nobody from an entrepreneurial world, there's very few people that feel like this is my right and everybody owes me. I think that's an offshoot, that's another positive from a family who's come here, and especially if they left someplace that was not as conducive to happiness.
You know, the point about entrepreneurs and entitlement is very on target. Can we imagine entrepreneurs or program teaching a course on entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial behavior and trying to show them, look, you're entitled to do this. If you fail, the government is going to bail you out because they have to. Because if they don't, we're going to take to the streets. So you are entitled to that level of success you want. And that's not the real world. Our
Well,
audience knows that. We know that. We've been through it.
we've grown and failed and grown and failed and had success. And that failure is what helps you where that growth is at. And I don't think the academic institutions that we have today would be able to muster the ability to have a meaningful entrepreneurial class, let alone degree, just because of where that institution is coming from. They all have Veritas someplace on their gate or their seal into campus, and they seem to have forgotten what that word means. I agree that entrepreneurs are a special group of people who, are willing to go take some risk, and they're going to work hard, right? They're going to put the effort in, and they have a plan and an idea, but they constantly are pivoting, looking at what they do or what they need to do. Let's talk about the idea that entrepreneurs, one of the things that they should be thinking about, maybe is a harsh way to say it, but something that maybe have challenges on is because you're known as the Chutzpah Guy. So I'd like to get your perspective on that, especially the Yiddish derivation of chutzpah. But an entrepreneur they have that probably naturally, but they also need to pull that from their people or give that to their people. I'm not sure what the right movement is there, but I'd like to go kind of explore that area with you because I think that's an important part.
Sure. Let's start by acknowledging that much of the audience is probably familiar at some level of what chutzpah is. And by the way, I've seen it pronounced as chutzpah, chutzpah, chutzpah. So I pronounce it chutzpah, which is a bit more guttural. The chutzpah is easier for Americans because we don't really have a ch sound in English. Right. And I think of chutzpah think of it as like a New York stop sign. You can forget the C in chutzpah, just bypass it, skip it, and go through that stop sign, or just go straight to the H. So that's how I look at it. But they're all correct. And as far as people's understanding of chutzpah, if they say, I'm not really sure, can you give me an example? I might say something like, if I was to say to you, I'll tell you, that woman, the company she built, when you learn about what she went through to get there, you realize what kind of chutzpah she had. People say, oh, I get it now. You're talking about discipline or grit or determination. I said, those are good synonyms to start. The other thing that we know is that, yes, it's a Yiddish base, the word chutzpah, but chutzpah exists globally. And people have different words or synonyms for it. I was speaking with, somebody in Oklahoma. I was doing a training session for the sales team for this company. In New York, in LA, in Chicago, I can say, hey, anybody here familiar with the word chutzpah? A number of hands will go up. If it's New York, almost all the hands will go up, and probably a couple of fistfights will break out too. But that's another issue.
Yeah.
But I did it in Oklahoma, and I wasn't sure what would happen. And 4 or 5 hands came up, and I was like, one has the courage, and they're going to tell me. And they had reasonable definitions, and then one person said something that I loved, the synonym. I don't want to call it a complete definition because chutzpah is a lot more complicated. It's a lot deeper than people realize. And he said, gumption. And I said, what a great word to capture the idea that, hey, I'm not a quitter.
No, that's a big part of it.
Yes.
Gumption is a big part of it.
Yes. And then even I was being interviewed by somebody who asked me, are you familiar with the word sisu? S-I-S-U. And I said, no. He said, well, my background is Finnish. Sisu sounds a lot like chutzpah. Well, you're the definitions, what we've been talking about. And I said, I didn't even know they spoke Yiddish in Finland. So it's a little unexpected over there. But the key here is everybody gets it. Everybody recognizes it. They go, oh, that was a bit more courageous. So how do you really come to a definition? Walter, how would you define chutzpah?
I'm a little more crass in my definition of it. It's somebody that's got balls. Somebody that's going to take the bull by the horns and try to ensure that they get what they want. In my opinion, I've heard it used from a negative perspective as well as a positive perspective. And I think that helps define the word, that it makes it a big idea when other people can have various interpretations that are all kind of centered around the same thing, but they come around and they're just slightly different for a different lens. It makes it interesting, and it makes for a good conversation to do what you do. It really helps relate to people because then you can pull out what people are really thinking. Yeah. I'm sure I'm not the first person to say it's somebody with.
Actually, you hit on two great points. Let's address the first one. The crass, what you describe as crass, I describe as equal opportunity, because we all know a lot of women have balls, have
Yes.
chutzpah. I spoke
Yes.
at a business conference, and of course, I always ask the question, and there's a woman like 2 rows deep. As soon as I asked the question, her hand shot up. I immediately said, "Yes, what is it?" And she just goes, "Balls," and the entire audience lost it. And she was the successful founder of a company that was growing. So we get it when we see it. The other piece you said, which is really interesting, chutzpah can have positive and negative components. You can think in terms of good chutzpah and bad chutzpah. I actually have identified, every time I think about it, there are different types of chutzpah. In my book, I write about 6 different types, along with my more thorough definition of chutzpah. The good and bad, because that confuses people. There are people who said to me, no, chutzpah is arrogance. It's deceit. It's not being truthful. My response is, chutzpah is a skill set. And we can all misuse the skill sets that we have. And they said, well, what do you mean? And I said, let's assume you and I both decide the way those unicorn companies in Silicon Valley are hiring coders, I'm going to take courses in programming, I'm going to get certified, and I'm going to get a great paying job from one of those companies, because the thing they most need right now is coders. You and I might take that course together. When we're done, you end up creating wonderful app algorithms to help businesses track the efficiency of new products or the distribution, what's working, what isn't, what marketing seems to be resonating with clients. You might create apps for people to do their expense reports on their phone. These are all examples of using that software development, that programming skill. I might choose, with that exact same skill set, having gone through the same courses you did, to create ransomware. It's the same skill set. It's the ethics of the person behind it. Well, chutzpah is the same. Yeah. I don't want to keep going back to New York, but we're both kind of New Yorkers. I tell the story of 2 businesses, New York-based businesses. One was started by a guy who did not grow up in a better area of New York. Education was more limited. Streets were very tough, and he grew up a street kid. That was his education. Yet by the time he was 19, he was clearing $2 million a year. He was a drug dealer. Now, let me contrast that for a second with somebody who chose a completely different profession. This person felt that he had a workout program that was different than others, was distinctive, and he wanted to open up a gym, in essence, a facility, a club for it. And when we think about that industry, it's a $40 billion industry. And it's like Pareto's principle, the 80-20 rule. A very small percentage of the people or the names in that industry are the giants. They're well capitalized, maybe they're public, maybe they're part of a private equity group that's putting a bunch of local gyms together to go regional or national. But it is a tough business to get into if you're a solopreneur or an entrepreneur without the money. Yet he succeeded. And I say that, I would love to have coffee across the table from the guy who built that successful single location in a very crowded market in New York, where people know all the big names on the health club side. But between us, I'd be a little bit reluctant to have coffee across the table from the guy who built a drug empire in his teens. We're too far apart culturally. The real interesting thing, it's the same guy. And that's exactly right. The wow is the reaction that, holy, this is remarkable. But it shows that the chutzpah that it took to break out and become well known on the drug dealing side. And he was different. He grew up and he observed the dealing on street corners. And he thought, there's a better way to do this. And as he rose his way through the ranks and decided to go out on his own, he decided, we need delivery services. So instead of having our customers come here, we're going to find a higher level of clientele. And he found people in white-collar jobs, Wall Street traders. They were his clients. He would have delivery people take the drugs, get the cash. And that's what he did well. He was sentenced eventually to 7 years in prison. He was caught, and he decided, amongst other things, but when he went in there, one, the doctor told him, you're about 70 pounds overweight. You're not going to survive 7 years in this physical condition. And he told himself, I need to survive because I've just had a boy. I just had a child. And he wanted to get out and be a better father to his son than he felt, provide a better upbringing than he had. That was his purpose while in jail. Well, during his months in solitary confinement, he ended up creating a number of exercises using his own body weight because they wouldn't give him equipment. He had very limited access to anything he could use for weights, so it was all about his body weight. Well, when we got out of solitary and went back into the general prison population, people were like, whoa, what happened to you? Can you teach me how to get into that shape? And he suddenly started training people. That led to when he was paroled, given his freedom with a lot of strings attached, to deciding, I can do this. Now, a lot of felons have difficulty getting jobs, and he couldn't find a job. So he thought, well, maybe I should open a gym because I did so well with this, but nobody would lend him money. So being the chutzpah-oriented person he was, he said, I'm going to find a way around this problem. I'm going to build a business because I owe it to my kid. I've made a promise to myself that I'm not going back. So he said he had business cards made up, and he says, you know who my clientele were? If I saw a woman in yoga pants, I gave him a business card. And I started doing training sessions in the parks. And I charge a nominal amount, $6, $10 a person for coming by. Some people would even pay me more. And it kept growing, word of mouth, and my handing out more and more business cards. Eventually got to the point where the parks were no longer feasible because it was subject to weather, conditions, too many drop-ins. So he went back, and by this time, an organization had started up that was lending money to help ex-convicts open businesses or get started. So he borrowed the money there and opened up his gym on the same street corner or just down the street from where he grew up and was dealing drugs. The other interesting thing, the people he hired were also all ex-convicts.
Sure.
Because he felt, now I can give something back.
That's a hell of a story. And definitely not all, but a good chunk of the bigger definition of chutzpah is within that story of somebody having the audacity, somebody having the balls, somebody having the gumption to go do what they intended to do, right? Despite the challenges that were put forth, legitimate challenges, right? That we encounter being an entrepreneur. Not all of us are, convicted felons, but, if you pay your debt to society and you actually try to do something good, we should be given that opportunity. I love that story, and it really is a definition of chutzpah.
What it shows is that the skill set is the same, how we implement. He had chutzpah as a kid. He learned a lot. The experience helped him when he went into a legal business. People have said, okay, that's one example. I can't imagine a lot of people either are good and then become bad, or bad and then become good in terms of the use of chutzpah. And then I give him the example of Bernie Madoff, who when he first started his business, it was legit. He was a bright guy, he was energetic, he was hardworking, and he found a niche on the trading side of penny stocks. He was able to make money. Well, the stock exchange changed the rules as to how that could be priced. That eliminated the great majority of his margins. Things changed. But his ability to think and be original, persuade, his determination to maintain a lifestyle led him to becoming the most well-known example of a Ponzi scheme. So that's not unusual. What's unusual is the people like your listeners who
struggle to do it right and do it well and keep moving forward in a positive way. I think there's a direct correlation to sales in and of itself. When you learn how to properly sell, right? I'm going to use the word properly because it's consultative. We're asking questions. We're listening more than we're speaking. We're literally trying to determine if we can help this person, because if we can't, then we need to turn them to somebody else or disqualify them from our world. So when somebody takes that skill and uses it for good to provide help and to add value, because the word sales really is derivative of a Swedish word that means to help. So if that's what we're trying to do, then it is a good thing, right? But many people take the sales skills that they have and use them and tarnish the reputation. Because when somebody thinks of sales, it's been researched many times over the years. The image that pops up in somebody's head is the short sleeve shirt with the clip-on tie with the plaid jacket selling used cars, right? That's what people think about as salespeople. And it's one of my missions is to elevate the profession. I believe it's a profession and I believe it's a choice. In both of those stories, the drug addict to entrepreneur to Bernie Madoff story, good and evil, evil and good, right? It's what we choose to do. It comes down to those choices of that bigger skill set.
Right. Well, and that ties into, again, the great differentiator between your audience, and we're entrepreneurial, we're salespeople. I have a firm belief everybody at some level sells. And I'm going to use selling to also include persuasion. We all have to persuade people in our lives. The difference between this audience is that we recognize we sell, so why not get best practices by learning from others who are good at this? Why not figure out the ethics, the best way to share? And when you said that it was a Swedish word, boy, we've got the Swedes, we've got the Finnish today to thank for where we're going with this thing. That's like they're sponsoring this podcast for us.
Yeah.
But to serve the best salespeople, that's what they're doing. They're not pushing. Rather, they're listening, they're questioning, they're confirming, they're questioning more, they're providing answers, they're waiting, and at some level, it's like a shampoo commercial, then they repeat. Because until we truly understand what the client's needs are, we're somewhat guessing in the dark. Oh, well, I think I know what the person really needs and what the person's pain points are. But until we can really get a sense there, we're on a wrong path. And too often, our prospects are very happy to talk about problems, but they're not really in a mode where they think that the problem is big enough to solve.
Right.
I spoke with, so it's kind of some dentists, just some friends, and he goes, business, oh, we're so different than the typical business. And I said, let me ask you, what's the biggest thing you would recommend to people in terms of their dental health? I was like, well, they've got to come in regularly for checkups. And frankly, we recommend 2 to 3 times a year for cleaning, with every other year x-rays, just to make sure that their dental health is where it should be. Because if you wait too long, there's a problem. I said, if you ask most people, they would probably say, yeah, that makes sense to schedule these and go in, get those cleanings. Is that the case with your patient base? I don't want to say customer base, but your patient base. We're using the words synonymously right now. He said, sure. Yeah, too many of them don't come in. I say, so what happens? What changes things? Oh, when they wake up with a chipped tooth or some type of pain in their tooth because the decay has been left untouched, then they're in pain. They are on the phone and they'll pay for that emergency call. I said, what do you think sales is about? People recognize there are better solutions, but until they realize the implications of waiting or not changing vendors or not trying a new technology or not expanding into a new market, until they realize the pain that is inevitably coming, they're very content to sit back and say, it's easier to not make a decision. If I make a decision, I can get criticized. If I don't make a decision, who's going to know?
The biggest competitor for most salespeople, and they don't recognize it, is the status quo, to not do anything.
Yes.
And they make assumptions. So I was talking to a CEO about 3 weeks ago. We were going through some of the challenges that he was experiencing, and I said, well, that sounds like it might be something important. What is that costing you? So we went through a little math, and it was $50,000 a month. And I was like, wow, okay. Is that a lot of money? He goes, well, yeah, it's a lot of money, but it's not my biggest problem, right? So a lot of salespeople will go like $50,000 a month, right? And they just jump right after that. His biggest problem was costing him $500,000 a quarter. So instead of focusing on the little problem in his world, right? Let's focus on the bigger problem. Maybe we can fix that, maybe we can't, but let's go explore that. That's servicing your prospect, your customer, to help them, understand their problem and getting to a solution that might be compelling for them to take action, right? Because that's what you're talking about. The urgency was created because they woke up with pain in their head and they got to call the dentist to get this solved, where if they had just brushed their teeth twice a day for 2 minutes, right, so that we don't see you. To me, that's what dentists could do is like, hey, you want to not come see me and be in pain? Here's what you need to do. Twice a day, brush your teeth for 2 minutes, floss, right? And then come see me twice a year to just get the stuff cleaned off that's goopy. And then we'll keep an eye on things. But helping them understand that you're avoiding this huge pain, because everybody understands dental pain.
Mm-hmm. Well, your example with $50,000 and jumping in to try and solve that, but then asking another question, is that your biggest problem? And discovering, well, there's a $500,000 issue on a quarterly basis. That's a lot more important than the 50,000. It's like technology. You know, you have version 1, 2, and 3. My iPhone's always constantly being upgraded as they find improvements or ways to track me further. Never sure what it is that they're doing. But I remember the early days of my sales training. Probe, support, and close, right? So ask a question. As soon as you find something, oh, $50,000, this seems like a big problem. Well, I have a solution for you. We can sign now and be back here on Thursday with the installation, or we'll get everything in place.
Right.
And we've since learned that, no, that's premature. It's the beginning of a conversation. And the conversation requires asking more questions, understanding. Just because you acknowledge a problem doesn't mean that you're going to make a decision. Let's figure out which is that problem that will move things. The $500,000 a quarter was what you found.
Even that in and of itself, all right, that's your biggest problem? Yeah, that's the thing that we're trying to solve. Okay. Well, what happens if you don't solve it, right? And then, well, what if you try? That didn't work. Why didn't that work, right? And you're literally getting that person to dial in, shit, if I don't fix this, I could lose my job, I could lose my company, I could lose, right, the whole thing. And then it's like, well, it sounds like it might be important enough to take some action. Maybe.
Yeah.
But to me, I was always taught to if you wanted the prospect to move in a particular direction, you wanted to stay away from the direction you wanted that person to go. And you were just standing there with them, asking them questions as you're walking along. You're not pushing them. Mm-hmm. You're not pulling them, along for the ride with a conversation with some empathy, some skepticism, and curiosity, right? And that curiosity is one of the chutzpah skill sets, I think, is being part of that.
It absolutely fits. And it's interesting, when I first created or had this concept that what separates the people that I know who are most successful, many of whom may not have been professional salespeople by title, but they were founders, they were entrepreneurs, they were curious, they were hardworking, even if they were working in an organization. You don't have to be a company founder to have chutzpah. You can be the first person in your family to go to college because you're stretching boundaries. You can be that immigrant who moves here, and instead of taking the very low-paying, menial job that's being offered to you, you say, what's this? I can open a Subway franchise? I just need a little down, and then I have to work harder than anybody I know, and I've got family that'll help. I'm going to take that route. So the everyday person has chutzpah too. I first created this chutzpah, I called it back then the chutzpah rules, and I did it as a high-level sales piece. That's why I was working with so many sales teams. And the feedback I was getting was, first, thank you for not telling us the same thing every sales trainer ever tells us, because we already know the basics. You didn't come in here and tell us that for an hour or for a 3-hour workshop. You spoke about different things that frankly were more inspirational, more motivational. Things to, how do I get control of myself? I have the skills, but we're human. We get down. We get up. Mm-hmm. We run across roadblocks and we're tired of banging our head into the wall. Where do we go from here? Those are the behaviors you just taught me. So I realized I had something that made sense. Chutzpah is, the way I use it, it's an acronym. So each of the letters of chutzpah stands for a different behavior or characteristic that every one of us has access to. And at some level, we probably do some, maybe all of them, at different points in time. But knowing how they contribute to the overall success, and therefore being able to focus on the things that we're best at, and acknowledge that, I may not be comfortable with this, but that doesn't mean it's not important. If I'm not going to look at it, I better have somebody on my team look at this. So if we think of the letters, is there a particular letter in chutzpah that you're curious about? And I'll tell you how it... Okay, the Z. That's actually a great one, because as people go through it, they go, okay, now I understand CHUT. What's the Z you're talking about? Well, as individuals, as entrepreneurs, we run across issues that seem insurmountable. It's not just the no from a client. Actually, I talk about the H in chutzpah is about handling objections. So the best methods, practices for handling objections. This is taking that handling objections or the objections that are coming your way, they are on steroids. They are mountains that you have to cross to get to the other side. So
Governmental roadblock, maybe?
it could be governmental roadblock. It could be banks that keep saying no. Probably, I'd say most people on this call are familiar with the book Chicken Soup for the Soul.
Sure.
Guess how many publishers said no before they managed to get that done?
I think that's actually in the book. I mean, it was an exorbitant number of publishers, like all of them except for the one that gave them the whole list.
Actually, and I think there are more than this, but from what I've read, it was 144 publishers that turned down Chicken Soup for the Soul before one person said yes. And right now there are over 200 offspring of Chicken Soup for the Soul because it has been that successful. It went from this is going to help inspire you, make you move, make decisions that you weren't willing to take risks making, and look where it is. It's not the scale of 144, but there's the author who wrote a book. 12 publishers said no. Most of it was like, this just isn't for our audience. We don't think your audience, which we think is kids, but we don't think it'll work. The 13th publisher said, I tell you, it isn't something we normally do. I'm going to have my daughter read it. The daughter takes the couple of chapter samples that she has. Next morning says, Dad, this is the best thing I've ever read in my life. When can I get the rest of the book? Are there going to be more books? Any guess who this is?
No, not off the top of my head.
Okay, it was J.K. Rowling. It was the Harry Potter series. Now, J.K. Rowling at the time was as close to the poverty level as you could be.
Yeah.
On the British or UK equivalent of food stamps.
On the dole.
Right. I mean, really suffering, raising a child. She had to leave her husband, and she speaks about it, who was abusive. And that, by the way, is an act of chutzpah.
Yeah.
Talk about it not just being business. You're in an abusive relationship, you find all sorts of reasons to stick around. And even your family and friends are saying, maybe he'll turn around, maybe it'll become different next time. At some point, you've got to say, no, This is for my child, this is for me, however it is. It takes a lot to walk out. But anyway, in J.K. Rowling's case, that's what led to the book. Now, the, of course, interesting thing is why J.K. Rowling? Her name is Joanne. And the publisher said, look, this book, we feel, is going to appeal to boys of a certain age who identify and think, oh, this imagination, this wizarding thing, I can accomplish things by studying hard and developing this talent related to magic. And we don't think these boys will buy a book from a female author. So we're going to go with J.K. instead of Joanne.
Did she push back on that?
Not at the time.
That's interesting because I never heard that story before. Yeah. And frankly, I had no idea what her first name was.
Yeah. And the reason she didn't push back is because I have a publisher. And how many of us have been to that point where I've got a guy who's interested in my new product or service, or I have a bank that says they want to speak with me about financing without requiring that I sign over my house, all my assets, and probably my first 2 children. Yeah. So I need to move forward with this. So she took it. And of course, the rest is history. She impacted generations of children to read more. Now, there's other controversy related to her. I'm a big J.K. Rowling fan, both from what she did and even her courage in standing up right now.
Her chutzpah just to do what she's doing right now is authentic and genuine and should be respected.
Absolutely. So you asked about the Z. So what does the Z stand for? I don't want you to think I'm avoiding this. We think about the roadblocks these people have had thrown in front of them. No publishers, no financing, no bank will touch them. You're a convicted felon. I can't hire you. What do you have to do? You have to zigzag on top of, above, over, under, around these problems. It's persistence at an extreme level. When you have that, the no's from a client are easy to say, oh, I speak with enough customers every day. I don't let the no's bother me. If we are in sales, we get accustomed to that. It makes us stronger. Mm-hmm. But the level of zigzagging that's required to move your company from one stage to another if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a founder. The truly more difficult obstacles, you mentioned government regulation. Boy, talk about zigzagging. And that's the great thing about this conversation. Uber.
Sure.
Okay? Some of us are familiar with how that company got started. But one of the big issues they had was there are taxi and limousine commissions in every city in the world, big and small. And they're set up, by the way, to protect the money that they generate and the industry. In New York City, it was selling medallions for, at one point, it reached, I think, over $500,000 for a medallion that made you a licensed cab driver in New York. They did not want to lose control. And Uber, in some cities, was basically running illegally. They knew it, but they decided we need to build the case. Well, build the case means stretching the regulations. Now, I don't know how they define stretching, but it actually is a good thing they did because of the results are so beneficial. It impacted the world. This ride-sharing concept. How they got started, again, is another story, but they had these tremendous boundaries to overcome. Lawsuits right and left. They had...
Still lawsuits. They just went through one just a few weeks ago.
It was constant in those early days. And they had taxi and limousine officials who were saying, you know what, we're going to go after the drivers now, right? Because if you can stop the drivers, then you'll stop the company. So what they would do is they'd order a driver on a phone, driver would pick them up, and then they'd cite them and give them a $500 or $1,000 fine, which is one great way to kill the industry. So what did Uber do? They ended up creating software that helped them identify the suspicious orders or the phones that, oh, this is the guy that cited us last time. Let's tell him a car's on the way. Oops, got canceled. There'll be another one along in 7 minutes. Oh my God, traffic is bad. Keep waiting. So it's kind of amusing at some level, and I'm not recommending that people break the law by any means. But that's an extreme example of zigzag.
All right, so I get the Z, and I think there's a time and a place. And it happened in big cities, and my daughter was looking at Cornell. Staying in, is it Utica that's just outside of that?
It's up there. Could be Utica.
So there's a little town that we were staying in, and you could look up and you could see Cornell up the hill, and I'm like, hey, I can't get an Uber. I was talking to the hotel lady, and she's like, yeah, we don't have those here. I'm like, what do you mean you don't have Ubers? This is like New York. Come on.
It's New York. Why should we make it easy and cheap for you?
She looked at me and said, and this is like the nice lady behind the counter of Hilton, our mayor is the head of the taxi commission here in town. I'm like, oh, I see. Got it, right? Like everybody knew what the mayor was doing to keep out, right? And I'm like, so I have to take a taxi to get to campus? She's like, no, we can take one of our shuttles, will get you up there. I'm like, all right, let's do that rather than support the mayor's ability to block commerce.
Progress and fill the need. It's interesting. We did the Z. I mentioned the H as handling objections, or the first H. I'm going to go to U, the U in Chutzpah.
Okay.
Which stands for understanding need, pain, and opportunity. Only because we spoke about the difference at some level between need and pain. Oh, I know that this is a problem and I need to improve it, but I'm not ready right now. It's not in the budget. It's not a priority. And we have to use a questioning process to make people aware that, this is more serious than you think. This actually has implications beyond what you're looking at right now, and then it becomes a pain. Well, using the Uber example because we were on it, the way it was founded, two successful entrepreneurs, Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, Travis Kalanick, I think it was Garrett Camp, were at a business conference in Paris in the winter. And they had lots of money from the businesses they'd sold. And they both left the conference to take a cab back to the hotel. Now, Paris, like New York, like London, there are more cabs on the streets than there are people in a lot of cities nearby. They're always available, except when the weather is bad. If it's raining, if it's snowing, you can't find a cab. And the ones that are still on the streets already have somebody in them. So they're out there shivering, freezing, going, this is crazy. That guy won't stop. Where are all the cabs? The snow's just getting higher and higher. We've got a couple-mile walk back to the hotel. This isn't possible. And then jokingly, it was like, one of them is like, it's a shame. We've got these things in our pockets. Why can't we just order a cab?
Right.
That incident, there are opportunities around us all the time. We don't recognize them. They recognize that, that's not a bad idea. So the need for a cab, which that's not urgent. because they're taxis and limousines and public transportation, became a pain when you're freezing on the streets of Paris, and that created the opportunity that they then built and others copied, because the concept, oh, once they have the idea, well, that's so obvious, wasn't obvious beforehand.
No.
Or even if it was, people who realized that it was necessary didn't do the carpe diem, which is the C in chutzpah.
Yep.
That opens
Okay.
the word, which is seize the opportunity.
Well, you have to have your eyes open and be aware and be able to have the mindset to be able to, because that's the other aspect of chutzpah, right? It is a mindset. There's an attitude there that is important to, creating success, is having a mindset where you're willing to explore an idea like, is this viable? Is it real? And what does it take to get there? And can I pull that off? And it's going to be hard, but maybe we can. That's one element, and it goes back to your point that it's a set of skills and a set of ideas that somebody had. I wanted to ask this question, so let's say you do workshops with this.
Yes.
So let's say you had 20 to 100 entrepreneurs in a room, and you were going to do a workshop. Walk me through kind of what that looks like for them. What do they experience in that time frame? How much time is that, and what does that look like?
Most of them are 3 to 4 hours, but they can be spread over a day or even more with clients, because there are, again, I said it's an acronym. So there are 8 key behaviors and characteristics. Frequently, people say, this was great. 8's too many. I tell people at the end of a presentation, you've heard a lot today. I've given you a lot of stories. I've explained how this model works and how it creates a skill set that will be valuable to you. What I'd like you to do is not think about all 8. Think about 1 or maybe 2 that you personally can focus on. And if you're a leader or a manager, think about the culture in your organization. What do they need to focus on? And you may want to turn that into a quarterly goal. So if it is handling objections, then the exercises that I want to work with you on is the skill set related to handling objections. I mean, we've seen numerous models. Frequently it's somebody objects. Instead of responding, it's, let me make sure I understand you. And then you repeat back the objection. And then you get their affirmation. Did I get that right? Gives them a chance to add to what's really behind them. They says, well, you did, but there's something more here. And this gives you the information you need to overcome that objection over time. We're both sales professionals. I love the spin questioning model because Huthwaite Corporation, I thought, did a great job of teaching us that it's not just enough to ask questions. Rather, the questions have to move the prospect along a path. They serve a purpose. It's not random questions, but start with the situational questions. Tell me about the size of your organization, how many people. Then slowly move into problem questions. Have you experienced issues? You're growing with people. What kind of problems does that create? The problems are your first entree into understanding if this client or prospect is going to be valuable to you. You do that by understanding the problems, not responding, oh, we can solve that problem. It's way too soon to be there because you're not going to close that sale. Rather, it's, let me understand that problem. What happens if that problem remains? What's the implication to you? And that's the third in this model. And then you get to the point where the final types of questions you ask are need solution. How do you see solving this problem now, this need? And hopefully by that point they've received enough information and knowledge from you that you've shared that they say, you spoke about something you did with another client. Do you think that could work with me? That's where the sale moves best for both the prospect and for the salesperson.
Where it's not pulling, it's just letting them come to you and
Right.
helping them understand something that they may not have fully understand, and allowing them to say, hey, we need to address this.
Yeah.
And maybe you're the guy.
I spoke with a sales group. I think this one was based in the Philly area. And they were having their quarterly sales meeting, and they brought me in kind of as like a motivational speaker. And I hate using the word motivational speaker because if you Google motivational speaker, you'll find out that your sister-in-law, who's an accountant, is for some reason listed under that category. As I was in the wings waiting to be introduced, they're going through their announcement of the awards. Most over quota for the quarter, rookie of the quarter, or the various things that help build a sense of commonality between the team of, hey, we're really doing things individually and together. We're making our quotas, hopefully all of us. The company is moving on the path that they're supposed to be moving. And then when they got to the most valuable player, and by the way, when they talk about most over quota, they're going, this person was 267% over quota this quarter. Great hand, give them a hand. Or this person, the rookie, she amazingly 175% a quota. Her first quarter here, and she's a rookie. This was remarkable. Congratulations to her and her managers and her colleagues for achieving this. They get to the MVP. It was like, and this quarter, he was 106% a quota. And my ears perked up. I said, 106% a quota? Nothing to sneeze at. This is a tough industry. But it didn't seem to be at the level. And then he continued, and I understood what had happened. He said, the person who was introducing this person asked him to come up to the stage. And at this point, by the way, I peeked around because I had to see what was going on. It wasn't enough just to be listening from the background. Those of you know, I'm not going to use the person's name. I can make up a name, but I don't want to. He lost his wife last year due to an illness. And he has 2 young children. And he was a great rep, always meeting quota, always supporting his teammates, his colleagues. And that was a really hard time. Obviously, quota was no longer the most important thing in his life. He had to figure out, how do I make sure my kids feel safe? They feel loved. They feel that, yes, we're going to get through this loss because I'm here, your family is here, your friends are here. Here it is, it's been a full year, and he's back. So you hear that, and that is a story that resonates with the P in Chutzpah, stands for purpose. What drives us as individuals, as entrepreneurs, as salespeople, as cab drivers even, to do the best job that we can? We all have our own purpose. We're at different stages in our lives. We can have multiple purposes. They'll change over time. But when we realize that I'm not going to fail because I can't afford to, because too many people depend on me, that's where that purpose comes in. And that's why it's one of my 8 behaviors or characteristics of chutzpah. Because without it, the chapter in the book, by the way, is completely different. It talks about, you familiar with Man's Search for Meaning and Viktor Frankl?
Sure.
Okay.
Great book.
One of the greatest books ever written. And I don't think great in terms of, wow, I really enjoyed that. But rather, I can't believe he lived through that.
And rewrote the book after it was taken away from him.
Right. But then you realize as he talks about purpose, basically was the difference between life and death. That and one other element that we really like to address as entrepreneurs, and that is luck. Luck impacts us, bad luck and good luck. It's not the luck that determines our fate, unless if it's, like in the case of Viktor Frankl, life or death. You're selected versus you get to provide slave labor today instead of going to the gas chamber. But luck can be leveraged. And people say, how do you leverage bad luck? And I'm going,
learn from it.
You're right. We're entrepreneurs. We have the bad luck of losing what we've worked for months on, a bid for a client that would have made our company, and we lose it. We can walk away, say, they suck. They made the worst decision possible. We did everything right. We can say, let's analyze this. What happened here? Why did they go with the other person? We've got some good contacts there. Let's ask them to be honest with us. And this way we'll be better down the road.
That's a best practice, right? When you lose something in a sales capacity, or anything, really, even with like relationships, if you could get somebody to be honest with you, why did we lose that opportunity? Like, what didn't we do? And I've gotten like, well, you didn't really lose it. They won it. Like, okay, that's fine. What is it that they offered? Like, what was the missing component, right? If you're clear with those people that I'm not trying to change your mind, I'm literally trying to get better for the next time this happens. If you can be authentic enough to get them to believe that, then they'll be honest with you and they'll tell you, something that you can leverage, right? You can leverage that bad luck for the future. And if we're not doing that, it's hard to grow because those are the best opportunities. We learn more from those failures than we do from if we take action and try to change those. And that's the hard part, is recognizing that and getting a leader to be that vulnerable, to let people know that, this is on me and I want you guys to take risks and all of those things, that getting that alignment there. We talked a little bit about that before, but I think I want to go to the best way for somebody to really start to wrap their head around all of these ideas is just get the book and read the book and start there. Is that the next step?
The book is a great way for them to get a sense for all of the 8 behaviors and characteristics of chutzpah and see where they fit. I'm working on an assessment for people to see, this is where I'm stronger, but you don't need that assessment. We can self-assess or we can ask others, Hey, let me ask you, am I the type of guy that actually does things, or do I sit and talk about it, right? Because that's carpe diem.
Yeah.
And you might think, I really go after things, and then somebody says, what are you talking about? You keep talking about applying for that role. Or going and taking some more, taking those software programming courses to include, or becoming a product manager. All these resources are out here, and you've been talking to me about it for years. I joke about the couple that's watching Shark Tank. A product comes up, and the guy says, that was my idea. I thought of that 4 years ago. And the partner says, yeah, but he just got an offer from Barbara Corcoran while you're sitting here eating your Cheetos and talking to me. Right? So that's the difference between having a good idea and carpe diem, doing it, implementing it.
Yep. That's the part where the rubber meets the road. So finding the book, best place. Just go to your
It's on
website. The little
Amazon.
button.
It's actually, by the way, I don't want to push it, but it is on sale for those of you who are thinking not, oh, I can afford the book for myself, but rather you should probably be getting it for your team as well, because it should turn into a group meeting. Then my LinkedIn, I write frequently. I have a newsletter, so people learn. I will apply chutzpah to many different areas. I had a couple of weeks ago a situation where the fire department ended up coming to my home, and I spoke about the chutzpah of first responders. The article's up there. I don't want to talk about it now, but it's there. Sometimes the articles are very serious. Sometimes they reflect the humor that we have, that people have probably seen between us. Mm-hmm. And they go, oh, that's good. But the point is always made that the things we do are in our control. We can't always control the events that happen to us, but we can always control our response. It gets back to Viktor Frankl, by the way.
Yeah, it's our choices. It's what we decide to do with, and it goes back to that entitlement idea, right? Yeah. If something shitty happens to us, we can decide that that's luck. Bad luck. We could decide it's something that we can't control and we're stuck with it, or we could decide to stand and fight it and try to improve upon it and take away that victimhood idea that it's not who I am. I'm going to find a way around it, and having chutzpah gets you there. So I think this was we could talk for hours.
We probably could.
The way I always end these conversations is the relationship pastor-present with cigars. We've talked about the sales. We've talked about being from a great city, or once great city. What's your relationship pastor-present with cigars?
Well, for me, cigars are a metaphor, and I hadn't really thought about it. Basically, I know people who love cigars. I kind of like the smoke or the aroma from cigars, but I'm not a cigar smoker. I really don't smoke anything. Although now that it seems like pot's legal everywhere I go, you can't avoid inhaling and going, it takes me back to college.
Yeah.
So cigars are great because they are a way to reward ourselves for getting through another day, for putting up with things that are difficult, for moving ourselves and our businesses forward. It could be a cigar, it could be a glass of wine, it could be a drink, it could be a book, it could be talking with a friend, it could be any number of things. The important thing, what I like about cigars, is you feel good smoking it, and if that's what's giving you that, hey, this wasn't bad, or this is now calming, I really need this cigar because things are good, or wow, I'm rewarding myself and this cigar just is great. So that's how I view it. But from the standpoint of, am I a smoker? I kind of like the smoke in the background, but no, I'm not a smoker.
Got it. Well, that's a first. Somebody has looked at it as a way of metaphor, and it's a way to contemplate something, reward yourself, to ease out of one space in a day to the next. I've thought of it as a contemplative thing where I have different types of cigars during the day, right? Like I joke, I'll go walk 3 or 4 miles in the morning and I take a cigar for the walk, right? At different times during the day, I might just take a break and, grab a notebook, go to the park and think about something that I need to work through and contemplate. And that helps because it occupies my hands and allows my brain to kind of work as effectively as limited capacity as it has. So
that's interesting because like you say, your walk in the morning is like I'm thinking ahead to my day. I'm planning my day. The contemplative, the planning cigar. I need to sit. I need to be creative. Let me think about what I'm doing. You had a cigar earlier. That clearly was the chutzpah cigar. So.
Yeah, you're right, because I was in a meeting the other day. It was like a quarterly for a client. 3 salespeople got on first, and I was smoking a cigar, and they were like, "You smoking a cigar?" I'm like, "Yeah, does it bother you?" And they're like, "Why would it bother us?" I don't know. you brought it up. And they're like, well, it's kind of weird, but it's kind of cool at the same time. It's like, you don't care what anybody thinks. And I'm like, pretty accurate.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm in my space. It's all by me. I wouldn't do it if I was sitting in your conference room unless you invited me to, and then I would. I don't do it a lot with big meetings like that, but it just happened to work into it. So I had a little chutzpah. So.
But also it shows you're respectful of others in their situations. And by the same token, if somebody had said something, there's no doubt in my mind, you would have said, oh, that's fine. But it makes you, in a way, more productive and at the same time more reflective. It's just a feel good.
Slows me down. It slows me down from not going to, when I would leave New York and go home to visit family, and then I'd come back. You know, I got into New York mode when the plane turned up the East River to come into LaGuardia. As soon as I could see the whole cityscape, and I was back in the mode, right? That is a thing that I do, and I have to notch it down because most of my clients are not in New York City, so I have to go to where they are. Mm-hmm. And, you know, when I left New York and went to Atlanta for a year to kind of contemplate my next move, that was a downshift in terms of speed, in terms of how fast I could move and how I address things. Because, you know, in New York, as you know, go in and talk about the Yankees or the Rangers right out of the box. You're like, what do you want, right? You get to the point. And then you talk about the Rangers and Yankees if you haven't gotten kicked out of the room yet. So,
by the way, you just made me think of somebody, one of my heroes, and somebody who I can't imagine his chutzpah without his cigar. Winston Churchill.
One of my heroes. Yeah. Absolutely right. Great quotes. Guy with chutzpah, guy with tenacity, a bulldog. Probably saved Europe.
Western civilization. Yeah.
And drug Roosevelt along. It was some great stories there. So, Mason, thank you very much. I appreciate this conversation. We'll have to have you back on and to talk about some other aspects of this, because it can relate to life and entrepreneurship in a big way. So thank you.
Thank you, Walter. This has really been a pleasure. And thanks to our audience for today and those who are watching it over and over in the internet that lives forever.
Awesome. Thanks.